My name is Emberly, and 8 months ago, my boss pointed at a mop bucket and told me to clean the office because that's all I'm good for. What he didn't know was that I'd been waiting for exactly those words. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment he treated me like trash, I'd been collecting them all like precious gems, building toward this one perfect moment of destruction. The way he said it, with that smug grin spreading across his face while the entire office watched. Emberly, grab that mop and get to work. Cleaning is about the only thing you can handle without screwing up. His voice carried across the cubicles, making sure everyone heard, making sure everyone knew their place and mine. I stood there in my worn uniform, bucket at my feet, watching him tower over me like some king addressing a peasant. That moment changed everything, though not the way he thought it would. Before I tell you what happened next, I would like to know if you've ever been so angry that you felt perfectly calm, because what I am about to share with you will make you understand that revenge isn't always served hot. Sometimes it's served with surgical precision. And also, subscribe and click the bell icon if you really want to know how one sentence can destroy an entire company worth hundreds of millions. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the real story isn't about mopping floors or cleaning offices. It's about patience, planning, and the most satisfying takedown in corporate history. 3 months before that moment, I walked into Rook Stratagem through their temp agency program. Not because I needed work, I had a corner office, expense account, and salary that most people only dream about. I came to this specific company, requested this exact department, and asked to work directly under Mitchell Branworth for one reason: to destroy him. See, Mitchell had a reputation in our industry. Senior managers whispered about his treatment of subordinates at conferences. HR directors shared horror stories during networking events. But reputation and proof are two different things, and my company needed proof before we could make our recommendation. My real job? Senior Partner Relations Director for Cromwell Industries, the largest business evaluation firm in the region. We specialize in deep dive assessments of potential corporate partners before major deals get signed. Think of us as corporate detectives, except instead of solving crimes, we prevent companies from making $300 million mistakes. For 2 years, my team had been courting the contract that would make or break our fiscal year. A manufacturing consortium wanted to partner with a mid-sized company for their largest expansion project in decades. The money involved was staggering, enough to transform any business overnight. But the consortium had been burned before by partners with toxic workplace cultures, and they'd hired us to make absolutely certain their next partnership wouldn't become a public relations disaster. That's where Mitchell's company came in. On paper, they looked perfect. Growing revenue, expanding market share, satisfied customers. But paper doesn't tell you how the CEO treats the cleaning staff, or whether managers steal overtime wages, or if the company culture would implode the moment media attention arrived. So I did what I always do when surface-level research isn't enough. I went undercover. The temp agency was easy to convince. I had a fake resume, false references, and 8 months of my life to dedicate to this evaluation. My company would pay my real salary while I earned minimum wage as Mitchell's assistant, documenting every interaction, every policy violation, every moment that revealed the true character of their organization. What I didn't expect was how much I would genuinely hate Mitchell Branworth. Day 1, he looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. "So you're the temp they sent me. Try not to mess anything up too badly. No introduction, no handshake, no basic human courtesy, just immediate dismissal and contempt." Day 2, he had me organize his calendar, then screamed at me for 20 minutes because I'd scheduled his dentist appointment during his preferred lunch hour. "Are you completely incompetent? Do I need to explain how time works to someone your age?" Day 7, he docked my pay because I'd taken a bathroom break that lasted 6 minutes instead of 5. Wage theft is illegal, but Mitchell didn't care about legal. He cared about power, and I was powerless. Or so he thought. Week 2, Mitchell started the public humiliation campaign, calling me into meetings just to criticize my posture, making me stand in the corner while he conducted phone calls, like some kind of human furniture. Referring to me as the temp instead of using my name even when I was standing right there. "The temp will get your coffee. The temp can handle the filing. Don't expect the temp to understand anything complicated. Month 1. The wage theft became systematic. Mandatory overtime with no compensation. Required weekend work classified as volunteer. Lunch breaks cut short, then eliminated entirely some days. I documented everything, but more importantly, I felt everything. The humiliation wasn't just professional, it was personal, designed to make me question my worth as a human being. Month 2. Mitchell expanded his campaign to include other employees, making jokes about my intelligence during staff meetings, comparing my work to that of actual children, creating elaborate scenarios where my mistakes, real or imagined, became cautionary tales for the entire department. This is what happens when you don't think before you act. Don't be like Emberly. Month 3. I realized Mitchell wasn't just a bad boss. He was a predator who fed on the misery of people he perceived as beneath him. The way he smiled when I flinched at his criticism. The satisfaction in his eyes when I had to apologize for things that weren't my fault. He didn't just want me to do my job poorly. He wanted me to suffer while doing it. But here's what Mitchell never understood about suffering. It can make you weak, or it can make you absolutely ruthless. Guess which category I fell into? Month 4. Mitchell's behavior escalated to physical intimidation, standing too close when he spoke to me, grabbing papers from my hands aggressively. Once, he accidentally knocked my lunch off my desk, then made me clean it up while he watched and commented on my technique. Slower, Emberly. Make sure you get every crumb. Attention to detail matters in this job. Month 5. The psychological warfare intensified. Mitchell would give me impossible deadlines, then publicly berate me when I couldn't meet them. He'd change instructions midway through projects, then act shocked when the results didn't match his expectations. He once made me rewrite the same memo 14 times, finding new problems with each draft. I'm starting to think the temp agency sent me someone with a learning disability. Should I speak slower so you can keep up? Month 6. I watched Mitchell destroy other employees with the same casual cruelty he showed me. Jenny from accounting quit after he made her cry during a budget meeting. David from marketing transferred departments rather than endure another month of Mitchell's feedback sessions. The turnover in our department reached 60%, but upper management seemed oblivious to the pattern. Month 7. Mitchell's confidence reached dangerous levels. He'd started bragging about his upcoming promotion, the corner office he'd been promised, the salary increase that would come with his new title. He was untouchable, he said. Essential to the company's success. A natural leader who got results by demanding excellence. Some people are born to lead, Emberly. Others are born to follow orders and clean up messes. Guess which category you're in. Month 8. Everything changed when the consortium sent their evaluation team for the preliminary visit. I watched Mitchell transform into a completely different person. Charming, professional, respectful to everyone around him. The same man who'd spent 8 months treating me like garbage suddenly became a model of corporate leadership. But they hadn't come to see Mitchell at his best. They'd come to see my report. For 8 months, I'd been documenting every conversation, every policy violation, every moment of illegal behavior. Not on paper, not in files that could be discovered or destroyed. I have what my industry calls perfect recall, a trained memory that can reproduce conversations word for word, recreate timelines down to the minute, recall details that others miss entirely. Every insult Mitchell hurled at me, I remembered. Every dollar he stole in wages, I tracked. Every moment he violated labor laws or company policies, I cataloged. By month 8, I had built the most comprehensive case of workplace abuse in my career. And the consortium executives were about to hear every single detail. The morning of the evaluation, Mitchell was particularly cruel. The stress of the pending review had made him paranoid and aggressive. He'd already screamed at 3 employees, threatened to fire 2 others, and made it clear that any mistakes during the consortium's visit would result in immediate termination. "This is the most important day in this company's history," he announced during the morning staff meeting. "I will not tolerate any screw-ups, any embarrassment, any reason for our guests to question the quality of this organization. That means you, Emberly, stay out of sight and keep your mouth shut." But Mitchell had made one critical error in his months of psychological warfare. He'd taught me to be invisible, to blend into the background, to move through the office without drawing attention. Skills that proved incredibly useful when you're conducting covert corporate espionage. The consortium executives arrived at 9:30, 12 of the most powerful people in the manufacturing industry. Men and women who controlled billions in annual contracts, who could make or break companies with a single decision. They were expecting to meet with upper management, tour the facilities, and receive a final recommendation about their potential partnership. Mitchell led them to the main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. He'd rehearsed his presentation for weeks, practiced his charm offensive, prepared for every possible question about revenue projections and market penetration. What he hadn't prepared for was me walking into that room. I finished mopping the hallway outside the conference room, listening to Mitchell's opening remarks through the thin walls. He was in full performance mode, spinning tales of employee satisfaction and company culture that bore no resemblance to the reality I'd lived for 8 months. Our staff retention speaks to the quality of our leadership, he was saying. People want to work here because we treat everyone like family. That's when I decided 8 months of documentation was enough. Time for the main event. I knocked on the conference room entrance, still holding my mop, uniform wrinkled from the morning's work. Mitchell's head snapped toward me, his face already darkening with rage. "I told you to stay out of sight," he hissed, striding toward me. "Get back to work and don't interrupt us again." But instead of retreating, I stepped into the room. The 12 executives looked up from their presentation materials, confusion replacing their previous attention. "Actually," I said, setting down my mop and straightening my shoulders, "I think it's time we had a different conversation." Mitchell's face went from dark to purple. "Get out, now. Before I have security, remove you." I smiled at him, the same smile I'd been practicing for 8 months. "Sorry I'm late," I announced to the room. "Shall we begin the quarterly evaluation?" The atmosphere in the room shifted like someone had flipped a switch. The executives stopped looking at their papers and started looking at me. Really looking. Like they were seeing me for the first time. "What is this?" demanded the lead executive, a woman whose company controlled 30% of the region's manufacturing capacity. "Who is this person?" I reached into my uniform pocket and pulled out my real identification badge. Senior Partner Relations Director, Cromwell Industries. The same badge I'd been carrying for 8 months, waiting for this exact moment. "My name is Emberly Hartman, and I've been conducting the most comprehensive workplace culture assessment of my career. For 8 months, I've been embedded in this organization, experiencing firsthand the management practices, employee treatment, and corporate culture that would accompany any potential partnership." Mitchell's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The color drained from his face as he finally understood what had been happening right under his nose. "Based on my direct experience," I continued, pulling out a detailed report from my other pocket, "I'm recommending immediate termination of all partnership discussions." The room erupted in whispers and heated discussions between the executives. Mitchell stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed presentation crumble in real time. "This is insane," he stammered. "She's lying. She's a temp from an agency. I can show you her paperwork." The paperwork was part of the evaluation process. I explained calmly. Everything about my employment here was designed to test how this organization treats its most vulnerable workers. The results speak for themselves. I opened my report and began reading. 8 months of systematic wage theft, documented verbal abuse, illegal workplace practices, pattern harassment of multiple employees. Each item was detailed with dates, times, and specific examples that painted a picture of an organization with fundamental cultural problems. The executives listened in growing horror as I described the daily reality of working under Mitchell's management. The stolen wages alone violated multiple federal regulations. The harassment would have triggered lawsuits in any state. The systematic abuse created liability that no responsible corporation would ever willingly absorb. "Mr. Branworth," said the lead executive when I finished my presentation, "is this evaluation accurate?" Mitchell was sweating now, his carefully pressed shirt showing damp patches under his arms. "She's exaggerating." taking things out of context. Every manager has to maintain discipline. Discipline, I repeated. Is that what you call telling me to clean the office because that's all I'm good for, in front of your staff, this morning? The room went completely silent. 12 pairs of eyes focused on Mitchell with laser intensity. The specific incident Mr. Branworth is referring to occurred approximately 40 minutes ago, I continued. He ordered me to mop floors while addressing the systematic wage theft and harassment I've documented over the past 8 months. His exact words were, "Clean the office, that's all you're good for." That's not, Mitchell began, then stopped, because we both knew exactly what he'd said and exactly how he'd said it. The lead executive closed her folder with a sharp snap. "Mr. Branworth, this evaluation has revealed systemic cultural problems that make your organization unsuitable for our partnership requirements. Effective immediately, we're terminating all contract discussions." "Wait," Mitchell said, desperation creeping into his voice. "You can't base a $300 million decision on the complaints of one disgruntled employee." "We're not," replied another executive. "We're basing it on the professional assessment of Cromwell Industries, the most respected evaluation firm in the region. Their recommendations have never steered us wrong." And that's when Mitchell finally understood the magnitude of what had just happened. This wasn't just about losing his temper with a temp worker. This was about the complete destruction of the biggest opportunity in his company's history. The executives filed out of the room within minutes, their decision final and irreversible. $300 million in potential revenue, gone. 5 years of projected growth, eliminated. The company's future, reduced to rubble by 8 months of documented cruelty. Mitchell stood alone in the conference room, staring at the spot where his career had just died. I picked up my mop and started to leave, then paused at the entrance. "By the way, Mitchell, I'll be submitting a separate report to the Department of Labor regarding the wage violations. They take systematic theft from minimum wage workers very seriously." His face went white as he realized the legal implications. Criminal charges, federal investigations, personal liability for every dollar he'd stolen from me, and countless other employees. "You planned this," he whispered. "From the beginning, you planned this." I looked back at him one final time. This man who'd spent 8 months trying to break my spirit, who'd treated me like something less than human, who'd fed his ego on my humiliation. "Mitchell," I said, "I didn't plan anything. You did this to yourself. Every insult, every stolen dollar, every moment you chose cruelty over basic human decency, those were your choices. I just documented them." The mop bucket sat forgotten in the hallway as I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I could hear Mitchell's phone ringing, probably his supervisor, demanding answers for the disaster that had just unfolded. Within hours, news of the lost contract spread through the company like wildfire. Stock prices began falling before market close. Board members called emergency meetings. Mitchell's supervisor, who'd been planning his promotion, instead found himself explaining to shareholders how one employee's behavior had destroyed the company's biggest opportunity. The media picked up the story by evening. Corporate culture costs company $300 million contract. Hidden camera investigation reveals systematic workplace abuse. When bad bosses cost everything. Mitchell's name became synonymous with the most expensive management failure in recent corporate history. The same man who'd been destined for a corner office and executive salary found himself unemployed, unemployable, and facing federal charges for wage theft. But the real satisfaction wasn't watching Mitchell's world crumble. It was knowing that the other employees would never again have to endure what I'd experienced. Jenny from accounting could return to her department without fear. David from marketing wouldn't need to transfer again. The 60% turnover rate would hopefully drop as new management learned from Mitchell's example. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's about making sure they can never hurt anyone else again. And sometimes, if you're very patient and very careful, you can accomplish both goals with a single conversation. I walked out of that building for the last time, leaving behind my uniform, my mop, and 8 months of humiliation. But I took with me something far more valuable, the knowledge that respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost everything. The temp agency called that evening, concerned about my sudden departure. I explained that my assignment had been completed successfully, and they shouldn't expect any negative feedback from the company. In fact, they probably wouldn't be hearing from that company again for quite some time. My real employer, Cromwell Industries, was thrilled with the results. The consortium executives had already recommended our services to 3 other major corporations. Our reputation for thorough, uncompromising evaluations had been solidified by the most dramatic assessment in company history. As for Mitchell, the last I heard, he was working retail at an electronics store across town. Minimum wage, no benefits. Answering to a manager half his age who treats him exactly the way he used to treat me. And every time he has to say, "Yes, sir," or "right away" to someone who used to be beneath him, I hope he remembers the mop bucket and the words that cost him everything. 3 weeks after Mitchell's downfall, I received a phone call that made the entire 8-month operation worth every humiliating moment. "Miss Hartman, this is Rebecca Torres from Channel 7 Investigative News. We're doing a story about workplace abuse in corporate America, and your case has become a focal point for labor rights advocates across the country. Would you be willing to do an interview?" I almost laughed. Mitchell's story had gone viral in ways I never anticipated. Social media exploded with people sharing their own experiences of workplace abuse. Labor rights organizations started using his case as an example of why stronger protections were needed. Business schools began teaching entire classes on the Mitchell-Branworth incident as a cautionary tale about toxic leadership. "I'd be happy to discuss the importance of corporate accountability," I told Rebecca. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. I sat across from Rebecca in the studio, wearing the same professional attire I'd worn during my real job for years. No uniform, no mop bucket, no pretense of being anything other than what I truly was, an expert in corporate evaluation with 15 years of experience and a reputation for uncompromising honesty. "What drove you to spend 8 months in such a hostile work environment?" Rebecca asked. The manufacturing consortium was considering a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They needed to know whether this company's leadership could handle that level of responsibility and public scrutiny. After 8 months of direct experience, the answer was definitively no. "Some people are calling your methods deceptive. How do you respond to that criticism?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about Jenny's tears after Mitchell's budget meeting, about David's transfer request, about every employee who'd suffered under Mitchell's management. Deceptive would be allowing a company with systematic workplace abuse to receive a $300 million contract. Deceptive would be hiding the truth about how vulnerable workers are treated when nobody's watching. I documented reality, not fiction. The interview generated even more attention. Within days, I started receiving calls from other companies requesting similar evaluations. Apparently, the Mitchell-Branworth case had convinced numerous corporations that understanding their true workplace culture was worth any price. But the most satisfying call came from an unexpected source. "Emberly, this is Jenny Holloway from accounting. I hope you remember me." Jenny. Sweet, anxious Jenny who'd cried during Mitchell's budget presentation. I remembered her perfectly. "Of course I remember you, Jenny. How are things at the company now?" "That's why I'm calling. They brought in a new manager last week, and it's like working for a completely different organization. She actually asks for our input during meetings. She says please and thank you. She treats us like human beings with valuable contributions." Jenny's voice cracked slightly. "I wanted to thank you. I know what you did wasn't really about us, but it saved us anyway. We were all so broken down by Mitchell that we'd forgotten work didn't have to feel like torture." After hanging up with Jenny, I realized something important about revenge. The best kind doesn't just punish the person who wronged you. It creates positive change that ripples outward, touching lives you never intended to impact. 6 months later, I got another call that proved Mitchell's destruction had consequences beyond what any of us expected. "Ms. Hartman, this is Attorney General Patricia Chen's office. We've been building a case against systematic wage theft in the service industry, and we'd like to use your documentation as evidence in our statewide investigation." Mitchell's wage theft hadn't been unique to me. The Attorney General's investigation revealed that his practices were part of a broader pattern affecting thousands of minimum wage workers across dozens of companies. My 8 months of documentation became the cornerstone of a case that ultimately recovered millions in stolen wages for workers who'd never had the resources to fight back. Mitchell himself faced criminal charges that went far beyond what happened to me. The investigation uncovered years of systematic theft from vulnerable employees, tax evasion, and fraudulent business practices. His legal troubles would continue for years, costing him everything he'd accumulated during his career. But the most unexpected consequence came nearly a year later, when I received a letter that changed my perspective on the entire experience. The return address showed Mitchell's name, but the handwriting was shaky, uncertain. Inside was a single page of notebook paper with words that looked like they'd been written and rewritten multiple times. Emberly, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I've spent the last year thinking about what I did, not just to you, but to everyone who worked for me. The therapy sessions my lawyer required have forced me to confront things about myself that I never wanted to see. You were right about everything. The way I treated people wasn't management, it was abuse. I told myself I was demanding excellence, but really I was feeding something ugly inside me that enjoyed watching other people suffer. I can't undo the damage I caused, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your courage to stand up and expose the truth probably saved other people from going through what you experienced. That matters, even if nothing else I did matters. I lost everything because of my own choices, and I deserve to lose it. But maybe some good came out of the destruction, and maybe that's enough. Mitchell. I read the letter 3 times, trying to process the emotion behind the words. This wasn't the same man who'd pointed at a mop bucket and told me that cleaning was all I was good for. This was someone who'd been forced to confront the reality of his actions and their consequences. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it, not as a trophy or validation, but as a reminder that even the most toxic people can sometimes recognize their failures and choose to change. The real epilogue to this story came 2 years later, when I was conducting another undercover evaluation for a different client. This time, I was investigating a tech startup whose employees had reported concerning management practices. On my first day, the CEO gathered the entire staff for a welcome meeting. "We have a new team member joining us," she announced. "But before we continue, I want everyone to remember the Mitchell Branworth case from a few years ago. That's exactly the kind of leadership culture we refuse to create here." She gestured toward me without knowing who I really was. Every employee deserves respect, regardless of their position or how long they've been with us. We treat our janitors with the same courtesy we show our executives, because character is revealed in how we treat people who can't fight back. I almost smiled at the irony. Mitchell's name had become shorthand for everything wrong with corporate leadership. Business schools taught entire courses on his failures. Management training programs used his case as an example of how quickly toxic behavior can destroy careers and companies. In a strange way, Mitchell had achieved a kind of immortality, not as a successful executive, but as a cautionary tale that would influence business practices for decades. 3 years after that morning with the mop bucket, I was invited to speak at the annual conference for human resources professionals. The topic: identifying and preventing toxic workplace cultures before they destroy your organization. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of 500 HR directors and corporate executives, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. 8 months of humiliation had become a career-defining case study. Mitchell's cruelty had inadvertently made me one of the most sought-after experts in workplace culture evaluation. The Mitchell Branworth case taught us that toxic leadership isn't just bad for employee morale. I told the audience, it's an existential threat to organizational survival. Companies can lose hundreds of millions in potential revenue because one manager chose cruelty over compassion. During the question and answer session, a woman from the back row raised her hand. "What would you say to managers who think tough leadership requires being harsh or demanding?" I thought about Mitchell's letter, about Jenny's phone call, about all the employees whose lives had been improved by his removal. I'd say that truly tough leadership requires the courage to be kind. Anyone can intimidate people who depend on them for their livelihood. Real strength is building people up instead of tearing them down, creating success instead of demanding it through fear. After the conference, Dozens of attendees approached me with their own stories. Managers who'd recognized toxic behavior in themselves and committed to change. HR directors who'd implemented new policies to protect vulnerable workers. Executives who'd restructured their evaluation processes to identify problems before they became disasters. Each conversation reinforced something I'd learned during those 8 months with Mitchell. Individual actions have consequences that extend far beyond what we can predict or control. His decision to humiliate me had rippled outward, affecting legislation, corporate policies, and thousands of workers he'd never met. My decision to document and expose his behavior had done the same, creating positive changes that continued years after our confrontation ended. 4 years later, I established my own consulting firm specializing in deep culture corporate evaluations. The demand was overwhelming. Companies had learned that surface-level assessments weren't enough to identify systematic problems. They needed someone willing to go undercover, to experience their workplace culture firsthand, to provide unvarnished truth about how their organizations really functioned. My waiting list extended 2 years out. Fortune 500 companies competed for my services. Business magazines wrote articles about my methods and their effectiveness in preventing costly cultural disasters. Mitchell's name still appeared in every article, every case study, every presentation about my work. His legacy was permanently linked to the worst practices in corporate leadership, while mine became associated with accountability and positive change. The final piece of this story came 5 years after that morning in the conference room, when I received an invitation that initially puzzled me. Cromwell Industries requests your presence at the annual awards ceremony for excellence in corporate responsibility. I'd left Cromwell years earlier to start my own firm, but we maintained a friendly professional relationship. What confused me was why they'd want me at an awards ceremony. The answer became clear when I arrived at the elegant hotel ballroom where the ceremony was being held. My former colleagues greeted me warmly, but their excitement seemed unusually intense. "You really don't know why you're here?" asked my former supervisor, grinning widely. "I assume you're giving someone an award for excellent corporate evaluation practices," I replied. "We are," she said. "We're giving it to you." The award was for Most Impactful Corporate Culture Assessment, and it came with a plaque that would hang in Cromwell's lobby permanently. But more than the recognition, it represented something profound about the work we'd accomplished together. The Mitchell-Branworth evaluation didn't just save one client from a disastrous partnership, the presenter explained to the audience. It fundamentally changed how corporations approach culture assessment, how managers think about employee treatment, and how vulnerable workers are protected in professional environments. Standing at the podium, holding the award, I thought about the morning that started everything. Mitchell pointing at a mop bucket, his voice carrying across the office, his complete confidence that he was addressing someone powerless and insignificant. He'd been wrong about almost everything that day, but he'd been right about one thing. I was exactly where I belonged. Not cleaning offices, but cleaning up the corporate cultures that allow people like him to thrive. The audience gave me a standing ovation, but I wasn't thinking about their applause. I was thinking about Jenny's phone call, about the Attorney General's investigation, about all the workers who'd benefited from changes that started with 8 months of documented cruelty. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about construction, building something better from the ruins of what came before. Mitchell's career died in that conference room, but from its destruction came policies, protections, and practices that improved conditions for countless workers. That's the kind of revenge that lasts, not the momentary satisfaction of watching someone suffer, but the lasting knowledge that their suffering created something meaningful and positive. 6 years later, I still carry that lesson with me. Every evaluation I conduct, every toxic manager I expose, every positive change that results from difficult conversations, they're all connected to that morning when Mitchell Branworth told me that cleaning was all I was good for. He was wrong, of course, but in trying to diminish me, he accidentally revealed everything I needed to know about him. And that revelation changed both our lives forever, just not in the way he expected. So if you've ever been told you're not good enough, smart enough, or valuable enough by someone who should know better, remember this. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down are actually providing you with the tools you need to build something extraordinary. You just have to be patient enough to see the opportunity and brave enough to take it. Now I want you to leave a comment below telling me about a time when someone underestimated you and how it turned out. Hit that like button if this story showed you that revenge can be about justice, not just payback. And subscribe because I have more stories about people who thought they could break others, only to discover they'd picked the wrong target. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the quiet ones finally decide to speak up.